You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic.
I'm Matt Gerasimovich, PhD candidate at Northwestern University, studying Russian literature and film.
And I'm Cameron Lalana, a literature enthusiast. We're two friends who met studying in Russia. We like talking about books so much that we made it into a podcast.
Every episode, we dive deep into something we've read or watched. Our goal is to help you get more out of these works and maybe, just maybe, learn a thing or two along the way.
If you're interested in supporting us, you can head on over to our website, slaviclitpod.com. All right, Matt, what are we getting into this week?
This week, we are watching and discussing Sergei Eisenstein's film Strike from 1925. It is going to be a doozy.
A doozy, especially because this has been a pretty significant topic in both your master's thesis and I think also in your dissertation as well, right?
It makes an appearance,
okay.
Yeah, in both, to say the least.
Yeah, he's being modest.
Well, it's also a pretty foundational film for a lot of the, at least one major class that I TA'd a few times. So I have tortured many undergraduates with this film.
And now he's going to torture all of you, so...
That's right.
Welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club.
This has been great. If you have not seen Strike, one thing we should mention, I think basically all of Sergei Eisenstein's films were just posted to YouTube by Mosfilm. So you should definitely watch if you haven't seen it. It's like an hour and a half. It is whatever else we're about to say, and just an incredible film, and such that I immediately, after watching that, turned to his other films and started watching, I think, both parts 1 and 2 of Ivan the Terrible. And I'm planning to watch his other ones. The art of it blows me away, and I'm really excited to get to talk to a genuine master of the subject about it.
That's true.
That's true. That one's literally true. You can't be modest about it this time.
Yeah, no getting away from that accusation. No, I wanted to cover this one because, like I said, it is something I've been paying a lot of attention to, and I don't know. I have my own specific angle on this particular film that I am kind of concerned with that probably won't make as much of an appearance here because it's more of an abstracted political question that kind of stems out of it. But as a film, it's a really good example of the early developments in overall Soviet film. So I think it's a good kind of jumping off point if there's something from it that really strikes you. There's almost certainly something written on it, or there's almost certainly something else that continues to be related to it forever in film history because of how foundational of a film it is.
And the nice thing about looking for things to read about it is that Eisenstein, as we mentioned previously, was a theorist himself, and so he wrote down most of it. So not that necessarily makes your job easier, especially over time as he develops, changes his mind, and other forms of further iterating his ideas. But you've got his own word on the matter. It tells you exactly what he's trying to do, or sometimes I think, as you pointed out, Matt, justifying things that worked in retrospect. Not that's a unique thing to him.
I totally meant to do this. But so if you're looking to read more, I'll say up front, the book that you will want to purchase is called Film Form: Essays in Film Theory. These are Eisenstein's collected essays, and it's translated by Leyda, who is like the professor, the everything for early Soviet film, and this collection has pretty much everything that you could want if you're interested in reading from the source what it is that's going on. Like you said, Cameron, it's not guaranteed to help you understand what's going on, but you'll at least be hearing it from the source.
Yeah. And if you're also interested in filmmaking, one thing that, obviously Eisenstein is not only a theoretician, but also a practitioner. So it's funny to see, his essays go between the high-minded ideals and also the technicals of this is also why I did this for practical reasons. It's great to see those jumps going back and forward.
Yeah.
Back and forth.
Yeah, it is kind of an interesting case being somebody that is writing about each of his own films. I think that's something that kind of maybe drew me to it initially. There's not a lot of cases that you'll have that. There's not a lot of instances where you'll have a director or an artist that's kind of writing about their own art as they're doing it and critiquing others and really kind of entering that conversation. It's an interesting case to be sure.
Yeah, so maybe this is a lot to talk about the film. Maybe we should turn to the film briefly before we kind of expand out on what exactly is there to see here at Strike. It is the story of a strike in pre-revolutionary.
Spoiler.
Sorry, we back it up a second. I'm going to be releasing all the details. Which I'm sure you didn't see coming.
Yeah, it's been 99 years since the film's been released.
Okay, yeah, so pre-revolutionary Russian Empire, story of a strike. Movie is split up into 6 parts, starting from the preparations for the strike, the reaction of the various capitalist elements, the actual strike happening, the struggles of the strikers, and then finally the police and military coming in and massacring them all. It's not a happy film. There's always I kept expecting it to have a turn and a victorious thing, but no, it just like ends on babies literally being thrown from rooftops and
and the cow shot.
And the cow, the very famous in juxtaposition, interpolation of cows being slaughtered between the people being shot down.
You know, they really killed the cow.
Oh yeah. It was harrowing to see like the cow bleeding out and like its eyes going wild before just going up as it bled out on screen.
Well, there was that one, and I think I'm pretty sure it was also from this film. The cows. There's another one where it's being shot or it's thrown off stairs. I can't remember exactly what it is, but they got a sick cow, and they were like, "All right, film prop." So,
if you're not so good with blood, the ending of the movie will be a little rough. I would you can skip around that part.
You'll be fine.
Is that what you told the students before you just played that scene over and over again?
No, they go unsuspecting into
it. They walk in, they're like, why have all our desks been replaced with the Clockwork Orange seats? Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
I hope none of you are having burgers for lunch.
Not after this film, probably.
No. But that's the basic idea of the film. Following the organizers who are themselves in one way or another either compromised, arrested. It's not a happy film, but it's a great one.
Yeah. I mean, there's some elements of humor, some whimsical parts. It's got everything, is what I would say. That's my pitch for it.
It does have everything. And it's really interesting to see at the very early stages of cinema as an entire industry, as a medium, the ways they're playing around with ideas. There's this great moment at the beginning of the film where you've got like I think it says like at the factory in Nazvod, everything's calm, and then and which in Russian is what you recognize HO, and then it transitions from the text on screen to actors holding up props and they spin it around. It's great. I love it. I love these.
There are some really amazing moments with transitions. There are a lot of like technical aspects that are maybe newer, or things that are definitely heavily used now in addition to the editing. Like there are examples of dynamic aspect ratio. There are multiple exposures. There are really interesting things kind of going on with the film. And part of it, though, I will say, just happens to be because Eisenstein is working in 1925, or this is really produced in 1924. But that is kind of something, I guess, to keep in mind. Part of the reason that Eisenstein remains so prolific is because the things that he did were truly prolific and truly groundbreaking. But then another part of it just happens to be like happenstance of being one of a few people making films before people were making a lot of films, So there's a little bit of that, right? Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, speaking of other people doing it, maybe a good place to start is because a concept we will absolutely not be able to get away from with Eisenstein is the idea of montage. And the question of how do we create meaning in our audiences. If you've listened to our episode on Leyda, you'll have a little more background in the state of the filmmaking industry at this point in the Soviet Union, and also the purpose of the filmmaking industry, propaganda. But a lot of different ideas at this point on what is the right way to create meaning in an audience. Maybe I should turn this over to you here, Matt, as our resident expert.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot going on to start at this time. The purpose of it, I don't know. I wouldn't say 100% was propaganda. It depends on the director and it depends on who's interpreting it. But there was a move to try to distinguish film from other art at this time, and that was one of the questions that the Russian formalists and some of the other directors that were working at this time, and especially Eisenstein working at this time, were trying to kind of tease out and sort of say what makes film an art that is different than something else. And they basically concluded that editing and montage, these were the kind of core aspects of what a film is. And it's actually a pretty significant statement because it contrasted with what was for what some people thought and what some people probably today, if you're just to ask somebody, like what film is, and they might say that it's just a representation of events on screen. It's just, simply filming events on screen and showing them. And Eisenstein would say that this is not cinema. Cinema is instead defined by the composition, the deliberate editing, the deliberate, conflict of shots, his definition of montage that then create that meaning. And this gets a little technical, and I think that it is definitely an area that a lot of these directors were sort of attacked over in the 1920s because some of them, Eisenstein in particular, he's really just interested in kind of working on his art and developing this montage. And I think what he gets kind of attacked for is the practicality of the film, the overall interest of the film coming second to his own experiments in montage. And this is written in many different journals, and it's something that he is kind of always kind of walking that tightrope throughout his career, because even though he's remembered as being probably like one of the most significant, one of the most foundational filmmakers ever, the fact of the matter is many of these films weren't like that popular among, I'd say, like the average person when they came out. Some of them definitely were. It's like, they're still well known, but there was definitely a criticism there that his films were sort of detached from the expectation that the average Soviet viewer would be looking for. And it was a real concern by the government officials who were working over cultural policy. There was a little bit of the sentiment by some of them just thinking like, can we stop with the editing, stop with the montage? Can we just make good, Soviet communist films that people want to go to see? And this is where other directors, quite frankly, like Protazanov, if you go and listen to our film on Leyda, yeah, we made a film.
We did.
If you go to listen to our episode on Leyda, that's probably an example of a film that does that maybe a little bit better, even though it was also ruthlessly attacked in the press. But I don't even know where I was going with that.
We're just giving exposition. We're talking about what is film, what is cinema, what differentiates it, and what Eisenstein conceived of that.
That's what differentiates it.
Montage.
That's what he thought, at least, anyways.
Yes, and it's
yes,
yes. And, well, it's an interesting idea because it's not just about how do we the question really is for many directors, or at least for Eisenstein, is like, how do we create meaning in the mind of the viewer? And also beyond that, like, how do we, and this is something I noticed reading his writing, is because it's an essential problem of how do you create almost like this is my language, not his, like create believability. And when there's the cow scene, the scene at the end of the movie when the workers are being slaughtered, and that's, intercut with scenes of the cows dying. And when he speaks of that scene in an essay, I think it's the montage of film attractions, he says, part of the reason I did that, well, one reason was to avoid overworking the extras. But another one is also to avoid, the falseness that deaths on screen have. So it's interesting to see like the idea of montage also overcoming. I guess the term we'd probably use is as a suspension of disbelief, and how montage not only creates meaning in the viewer's mind, it creates this relationship between the director and the audience. This relationship which goes beyond just, I don't need to just tell you exactly what to think. I can lead you to the right conclusions with this montage, with this contrast, but also we can keep up your suspension of disbelief by working around things that you might accept in theater, for example, which cinema has its own distinct art. I think he calls it the eighth art, and he's heavily associated with Charlie Chaplin. I don't know why his obsession with Charlie Chaplin is so delightful to me, but it is.
Everybody loved Charlie Chaplin back in the day. I mean, come on.
They still do.
They still do. I mean, when Eisenstein was in Hollywood, they were, him and Louis Buñuel were drinking around his pool. So there's a fun little tidbit of history.
That's a great tidbit.
Yeah. So this was in Buñuel's memoirs, recounting the time when Eisenstein was in Paris, and so was Buñuel. And he heard about it, and he said, "Okay, I want to go see this. The great Russian master. I want to see what he's working on." And this was during a period of time where Eisenstein was working on a melodrama, and Buñuel said that he was so furious that he wanted to go search around Paris afterwards just to basically, throttle him. And then he said, well, afterwards when we were drinking around Charlie Chaplin's pool in Hollywood, everything kind of faded away.
You need to bring back more directors who will, if your film is bad, they'll go hunt down their friends and or rivals and beat them.
It was weird. It's only like 7.5 or 8 minutes, I think, and it's kind of bizarre. Maybe a subject for a different episode, but it's something that I had kind of uncovered for a chapter that I'm working on. I don't know how big of a part it'll feature.
Right.
But what are you gonna do?
What are you gonna do? Well, we'll see how much it features in due time.
Yeah, in due time, for sure. And so I think that this piece on the cows being slaughtered is probably like, there are a lot of really interesting scenes in this film, but that's probably like the most memorable one for sure. It's one that's definitely quoted in other films. Francis Ford Coppola does it in Apocalypse Now, and it's just like, it's so fundamental to what Eisenstein is trying to do, and whether it succeeds or not is a really big, it's a big lingering question, because like I said, there were people in critics saying that nobody understood why the cow was being slaughtered. Now, I don't know. I think it's an accomplishment, personally, and in the line of Eisenstein theory, it takes him a long time to finally arrive at that conclusion, to really kind of explain what it is he's doing. And I think this one's a very successful example because of the fact that it encompasses like all of the major aspects of his theory. And it's a perfect, like, one-to-one, here's what I meant to do, and here's where I did it. And I think it was also like an emotionally affecting one as well. And so for that reason, I think that's kind of the standout of this film. And kind of crazy that I'm about to spend the next 40 minutes talking about that one scene. But right. Start the timer.
It's been running as soon as you mentioned the cow the first time. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so the basis of Eisenstein's montage and his whole, his whole everything is the attraction. And this comes out of the Russian formalists, and specifically, I think it comes from Viktor Shklovsky and Art as Device, which is an essay published in 1917, talking about basically like, everyone's favorite topic, what is art?
Mm-hmm.
Having a couple of drinks with your boys, sitting around talking about what is art. That was basically what the Russian formalists were.
You're all in 4 big recliners smoking cigars.
Yep, just like in this film, which I thought, all right, that looks pretty fun. Sure. Kind of want to record the podcast like that now. I know.
We're supposed to be condemning them, but it looks, when they sit, the fact that they look so comfy in those chairs, they're like almost childishness. Like this childishness in the way they like kind of lean back. They look like big infants, but I can't deny it looks pretty good. I can see why you'd want that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I kind of get it. I do. I'm not supposed to, but I get it. So the formalist and Shklovsky from this essay, he has this quote, which I think kind of sums it up pretty perfectly, where he says, "The purpose of art is to impart the sensation of things as they are perceived and not as they are known. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar, to make forms difficult, to increase the difficulty and length of perception, because the process of perception is an aesthetic end in itself and must be prolonged." And this is kind of, I think, I personally, I really resonate with this. I like this. I tend to find that with the things that I read, it's not so much somebody presenting something new to me that I enjoy, but it's the art of making something that I know so well seem as though I don't know it at all, right? And I find that to be sort of an even greater trick, if you will. The word trick is also, thrown around with the formalists and with art and film as well at this time. But so this, I think, really tends to influence Eisenstein's perception of his own art, and so that tends to be where the shock value of the attraction is derived from. It's actually derived from this impulse, I think, to make his own art sort of unfamiliar to the viewer, right? It's shocking. It's something you can't look away from. It's something that this is only a couple minute sequence, but it really does feel like it's going on forever, right? The way that the suspense kind of builds and builds and builds until it finally boils over. It does have that sensation. This, as you kind of alluded to, is this feeds into Eisenstein's main essay, which is Montage of Attractions, and this is what he is probably most famous for writing. This is like one of the essays, and it has nothing to do with film at all, actually, in this case, which is what's so funny about it. He has Montage of Attractions and Montage of Film Attractions, which are sort of like the same thing, except he says, okay, now this one's about film. So for the purposes of this course here, I'm going to start with theater, actually, because of how interesting I find early Soviet theater to be. And this is where Eisenstein kind of gets his start. He's working on lots of radical and experimental theater. He worked on one called Gas Masks with a theater director, Sergei Tretyakov, that I also did some work on. And, one thing led to another, and here I was studying Eisenstein after that. So, crazy things have happened. But the whole point of this particular play was kind of breaking down the barrier between the play itself and the audience. And Eisenstein kind of started to feel like he had reached the end of theater, more or less. He had reached the everything that he could do in theater. And that was kind of it for him. He needed a new medium to do kind of what he wanted to do, right? And he finds this in cinema. And that's kind of, he transitions about this time, mid-1920s, early 1920s, into film, but with an approach that comes through one, theater, and two, the circus. The circus is also enormously impactful on Eisenstein's work, talking about making something strange or making something unfamiliar. Well, if you just include some circus imagery, that is bound to do it. And so Eisenstein kind of marks this divergence between sort of early and a little bit later avant-garde, so to speak, in the Soviet Union. And Eisenstein, I think, is kind of to me at least, the sort of poster child. And this set of essays in particular is kind of the theoretical underpinning of what is sometimes referred to as the statist avant-garde. That is the one that's really pro-Bolshevik, pro-communist, really pushing for the state. And the way that he goes through this is kind of starting on an interesting, almost psychoanalytical perspective from the point of the viewer. He's really interested in impacting the viewer. When he talked about practicalities, this, I think, is his practicality. He will do anything that he can so long as he can have the maximum impact on the viewer. And he says this on Montage of Attractions. Eisenstein says that theater's basic material derives from the audience. The molding of the audience in a desired direction or mood is the task of every utilitarian theater. And he achieves this result through attractions. And he defines them as: an attraction, in our diagnosis of theater, is any aggressive moment in theater, any element of it that subjects the audience to emotional or psychological influence, verified by experience and mathematically calculated to produce emotional shocks in the spectator in their proper order within the whole. So basically, he then combines the two into a montage of attractions, saying that a free montage with arbitrarily chosen, independent of both the particular composition and any thematic connection with the actors, effects, attractions, but with the precise aim of a specific final thematic effect, montage of attractions. And he's super fun to read, you can tell, based on the way I had to read that, because of how he breaks up his own thought with so many parentheses and dashes, and he's got to go, repetitions almost.
You could truly feel the thoughts happening as they're being written down in this particular prose.
He does. The way this was it's not a knock on the translator. I don't want to imply that, but the sort of feeling of it is me trying desperately to finish a term paper when I've waited too long to do it. Of course, my term papers aren't as good as this, so it'd be nice. But
maybe one day.
Yeah, so if I may sort of parse this a little bit more simply, because it is an important point that he makes, and I think it's an important leap that he makes to film specifically here when he's talking about attractions not necessarily needing to be thematically connected with the overall composition or with the actors necessarily. They're sort of external almost to the plot. They're only there to influence the audience. But the way that he talks about this sort of mathematical calculation, now of course we know that that's not truly possible to do, but it is important to remember that is his ultimate theoretical goal, is the mathematical calculation of some universal effect, right? Some effect that can be both profound and moving, but also do that to everybody that sees it. And that's a challenge. And I think that is what gets him that statist representation, that statist kind of moniker, right? That's why he's folded in with that group. It's not an art for art's sake anymore. This is art with a purpose. It's utilitarian, as he says. And this purpose is to shock the viewers. And again, this is why I think it links back to art as device and this idea of defamiliarizing your viewer or your audience. I think that this is kind of his variant of that, and he pushes it forward in his essay Montage of Film Attractions. And he basically says, okay, yeah, theater and film, they're linked by commonality, which is the audience. And he says by a common purpose, which is influencing this audience in the desired direction. And he does this, or he says, through a series of calculated pressures on its psyche. And so it really tells you how he thinks about what he's doing, I think. And sometimes when we look at like cinema studies, I think sometimes there can be a tendency to perhaps, let's say, like overprescribe or overascribe rather some kind of effect to a director. You don't know. There are a lot of people working on films. It's possible that a director maybe didn't intend for this or that, but in Eisenstein's case, really, it seems that this is at least what he wants to have, is this oversight on the film, And this kind of, I don't know, right? He's really looking down at it. Like he's got a really good view on what he wants to do. He's got a really good grasp on what he's trying to accomplish. And then he has this very fascinating theoretical underpinning for it all. This is the one where he talks about montage of film attractions, is where he talks about film not being a representation of events depicted on screen. And I think you can kind of see why he comes to that conclusion. And it kind of makes sense in a very Eisenstein way, right? Because if you're just putting events up on screen with no thought going into it, or you're just trying to show some sort of, objective something happening on screen, you're not achieving your effect. You're not influencing your audience, and you're not putting any pressure on them. You're not moving them in any direction. And therefore, your film has no purpose. Therefore, it is not a film. You have a video or something, right? Like you don't have film per se. And that's what his main criticism that he levies at the rest of early Soviet film is. And this is why it gets really nasty with Dziga Vertov in the 20s, because Dziga Vertov does documentary, and they really they get at it in the press like pretty nasty, and it's kind of awesome. I have a whole section on one of my PowerPoints that I teach.
Oh, I love that. We should do a dramatic reading of their some of the warfare.
Yeah, it's like so dumb, but it's so funny. There are commonalities between those two, but I would say this is the kind of this is the theoretical basis of Strike. This is the basis of, at least in theory, all of Eisenstein's future films. It gets developed a little bit. It's a little different, but I would say if you're like, what's Eisenstein about? Watch Strike and read those two essays, and boom, I think you got a pretty clear picture.
The nice thing about trying to understand Strike is that, as you've come to understand from the last half hour, Eisenstein is really trying to do all the work for you to create those meanings.
Yeah, but so this is the fascinating part to me, and what I find kind of interesting on an academic level is that what that sort of takeaway is. And like I said, there were people that disagreed that this was successful. I don't know. I think it is, and I think that it continues to be used. And that's Eisenstein's idea of intellectual montage, which is one of his 5 types, but probably the most interesting one, I think, to me. And this is the sort of undepictable third meaning that emerges. And I know that I'm gonna lose some people on intellectual montage, because I can feel like when my students' eyes glaze over on this. It tends to be fascinating to me too. It's not only for Eisenstein, like, what is he doing? Is it successful? Okay, you can ask that question and get varying, opinions on that. But what I'd love to see also is how he's patterning his argumentation to sort of fit the 20s. Even this debate that exists between Eisenstein and another, major, mega famous early Soviet director, Pudovkin. They, I wouldn't say necessarily go at it, but there is a wide-ranging, let's put it, debate over how film editing actually works. How does it actually produce meaning? And Pudovkin says that the shots in a film create their meaning from their addition. So I think of this kind of as like the cumulative sequencing of all the shots is how your brain kind of processes them. And Eisenstein, like a good Hegelian, like a good Soviet Marxist, says no. Montage works dialectically. That is, through the collision of the thesis and antithesis, creating this great synthesis. The shots create their meaning actually from the collision of frames, not from their addition of frames. And this is how he arrives at intellectual montage. So at the end of Strike, right, you get the workers being slaughtered and the cow being slaughtered, and this undepictable third meaning, right? It may not necessarily be a visual thing. It may be an emotion, right? So a feeling of disgust, a feeling of contempt. There is something that kind of links these two and creates this third meaning through their collision, through the way that they are actually cut. And he does it a couple other ways. It's a little on the nose in Strike, to be quite frank. But when the businessmen are, there's the shot sequencing with the different animals.
Yes.
Right. And, they're being shown as different animals. And this creates this undepictable third meaning through, it kind of adds a certain flair, a certain characteristic to what these businessmen are, and gives you an additional reason not to trust them or not to want to be associated with them. And what I find interesting from this is that this is kind of the basis of like a certain prejudice or, a certain unspoken cultural association that can emerge when there are really popular forms of media. In particular, when film is so new and it's something that a lot of people are going to see, I think it does have the capacity here in the 1920s to like really impact in a large scale how the general public is thinking about things. And Eisenstein sees this immediately. This is what this is what the attractions are about. This is what, this is why we're trying to influence people. He's really utilitarian in that respect. And, it's fascinating that he's, essentially trying to create a universal language that he can use to direct, to mold, to coerce, to do whatever. Obviously it's not like 100% successful, but it's influential for sure.
Right. And influential in the sense that you still, I think probably part of the reason it's successful, a lot of these techniques are because they're so deeply inculcated into our own understanding of the world. There's this great scene in the middle of the film when the strike has just started, when they've shut everything down. They're running around. It's multiple factories in one complex. And so they're running around, closing the doors, putting these machines to rest. And then you go to this shot of three men staring at the camera, and superimposed on top of that shot is this wheel spinning. And then the three men kind of cross their arms as they stare into the camera, and the wheel superimposed on top of it slowly comes to a halt, right? And you've got this, pretty, to us, I think, pretty ham-fisted, okay, right, the wheels of labor are without, the laborers are coming to a halt. But that language, I think, is so deeply inculcated into us that we may look and think that's really obvious, but we may not necessarily notice some of the more subtle versions of that throughout the film, right? Like, as we talk about the cows being slaughtered, may talk about that scene, but it's also used to in much more subtle ways throughout the film as well. And I think that is so, we recognize that we are so, whether we know it or not, so versed in the language of film that this clicks for us in a way that at the time, getting used to this language, crowds, makes it a little bit more, may have made it a little more hit or miss.
Yeah, I have to remind my students about that all the time. Like, okay, you have had privileged access to many great films throughout your lives. There are people that had never seen a film. There are people that had never seen multiple shots cut together. Like this was this was groundbreaking right. When this came out.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we have to think with these ideas. There's this article I read by Noel Carroll, which is kind of summing up Einstein's philosophy of film. And as he notes, initially the idea of montage is all about editing, as we've been talking about here, the succession of different shots and different frames and the ways that a shot relates to itself too, like the way the shot is composed. But also, as this theorizing proceeds, it expands to and apply to not only to these relationships between shots, but also or relationships between shots, but also relationships of a shot to itself, of the composition to it, to the relation between sound and image, word and image, color relationships, so on and such forth. And of course, if you watch his later films, you'll see more what I'm talking about here, when a lot of these things are a lot more dramatic. Literally, in the case of Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, where it's so like literally like you're watching a stage play with such interesting uses of shadow, especially, but even in the brief period when, at least in Mosfilm's version, there's color, the way in which it uses red lighting, for example, to cast this pallor of insidiousness over this whole party. But you can see, I think, a lot of the roots of those more broad definitions of what could be montage, even in this film as well, right? Sometimes in subtle ways, like you mentioned, the fact that many of these characters are compared to animals, and yeah, you'll have those hard cuts between, for example, a monkey drinking a bottle of baby liquor, and then it cuts to a man in the exact same pose as the monkey drinking. But it also, in scenes like when you have these agents meeting to figure out how they can disrupt the strike, literally having it in this pet shop full of animals who are rattling their cages, right? And so even not just like this kind of harsh cuts between the cows being slaughtered and the strikers being slaughtered, completely different scenes. In this case, we have a pet shop where cutting between the caged rattling animals and these wreckers having their meetings, not as far apart as the other example. It seems natural in context, but right, you still get the same effect of this animal and cage up against right these wreckers. And so even if the cow shot maybe seems a little obvious to you at this point, at this stage of how advanced film editing has become, I would bet that caged animal shot maybe didn't stick out to you quite as much, even though it really gets to basically the same idea, but integrating into that scene a little bit more closely hides it away from us. So I think that's you could see how these techniques do become more advanced, even here in this very early stage.
Yeah, it does, but in a more interesting way to me, and this is what I'm on about all the time, which is that the great victory of Eisenstein is actually really not the victory of communism by any means. It's the fact that his film language and his editing techniques and montage are then co-opted by like Western business. And the fact that the exact same editing techniques that are used to propagandize the laborers in the Soviet Union are being used right now to sell us all sorts of crap that we don't need. I think the best example that I often give, and it's probably not my example, I probably lifted it from somewhere that I can't remember, is perfume commercials. How do you sell a smell? Well, you need to create a sort of undepictable third meaning of these shots that are colliding. If you wear this perfume or this cologne, you will be sexy, you will be desired. You can see how I mentioned a sort of psychoanalysis in this. It really is a deeply psychoanalytic process of sort of molding the audience that's watching that to the desired conclusion, which in the case of, perfume, cologne, it's not buy this product, of course, because that would be silly. It is, if you buy this product, you will solve this sort of, we understand that you perceive a lack in yourself that we can fill. And you can do that by buying this product. And so that to me is the most interesting thing actually about Eisenstein. That to me is beyond fascinating, that this gets lifted and used everywhere.
Right, yeah.
For all sorts of purposes.
Done so deeply that we still make use of the language to mean completely new things. As with, I'm sure anyone not already familiar with the idea of montage coming in, trying to rewire their brain to move it away from thinking about Rocky and starting to think about cows dying.
Well, yeah, when Eisenstein did the Rocky montage, that was pretty crazy.
I know. It's like, how do you get such range from a filmmaker depicting strikes, American exceptionalism? I mean, a man of many letters.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's actually a good point that probably I should clarify is, when we're talking about montage specifically with Eisenstein, a lot of times now montage just means it's used interchangeably with editing, and it's not the same. It is this specific composition that we're talking about, this this collision of shots creating this meaning. It's not necessarily just the overall editing itself. It is something a little more specific.
Right. Yes.
That always trips people up sometimes.
Yes, that's a difficult one to come around to. I also want to talk the film itself because obviously, as you've heard,
only theory.
We've run out of time. Only theory. No, well, there's a ton to talk about here from the theoretical standpoint, but also the film itself is just it's an unexpectedly fun film, right? Like,
what was your favorite scene? What did you like?
One of my favorite scenes. There's like all these scenes that I like, but that were I don't have too much to say about it, but it's just I know it's like Eisenstein is not big on documentary style. That's not his thing. That's Dziga Vertov. But there's moments of after the workers start striking, for example, the initial days before things start getting rough. It's the first real rest that they've had in quite a long time, and you see like a lot of fathers hanging out with their sons, really. And the screen tells you, soon the sons take after their fathers, and you've got all these little children cleaning samovars and in boots. And also a baby being bathed. I'm not really certain where to fit that one in, but I love these like little, borderline documentary details into the lives of these workers as a piece of like talking about here's what the strike is like. Of course, it does throw the appropriate anger at the capitalists and the directors and the managers and whatnot. And right, like one of the inciting incidents for the strike itself is one of their workers being accused of theft and as a result hanging himself in the factory. Right, like you've got this great range of like disgust to this like kind of day-to-day interest in what was going on to anger. That it's angering to see the man in such despair that he hangs himself, for interest in seeing the organizers come through and like trying to hide who the center of this strike is, right? Which much of the film is about the Tsarist police. I think one of the most interesting scenes actually is the Tsarist police. They basically try to get some wreckers. The film uses the term rabble. They go and they find the king of the hobos, basically. His name is the king. And they have him as he yells out at his band of misfits who all live in barrels. I need 5 unscrupulous men, and they all shout back, "We're all unscrupulous men." Like, it's such a bizarre scene of this like immense, like the idea, like the fact of wreckers, or I guess the term would be not scabs exactly, like labor trying to break up this labor movement. Quite important, but also really funny in seeing this army of rabble. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It's fun. It's interesting to see. One of the rabble is either like maybe a trans woman or a cross-dresser. Interesting to see a depiction of that, not neutrally because this person is among the rabble, but more or less treated the same as all the rest of the rabble. Not well. But it's just interesting to see this cross section of characters in life, in the film.
Yeah, I do think it goes back to like we had talked about, just that general feeling of being defamiliarized, which I think is kind of the experience of watching the film, which is actually what makes it so difficult to talk about the film, is because the plot of the film is relatively standard, but what makes it so special, again, is the way that it's depicted. And it's difficult to talk about the way that it's depicted and the effect that it has on you without watching it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But so, yeah, like seeing them in the barrels and, just who is chosen for actors, largely non-professional actors was Eisenstein's preference at this point. And so you get a very interesting cross-section of Soviet society that he chooses to include. And actually, although it's an academic point, I will say, it's not that he's against incorporating documentary pieces into the film. It's just that they have to be arranged a certain way, which is what he gets into it with old Vertov.
I remember, I forget, I wish I'd written down where I read this, but Vertov approved of parts of the strike, the fact that it did seem to eschew closer to his style, and I apparently
You got it from my master's thesis, Karen.
Oh, that was where
yes, that's where you got
I was like
it from.
trying to remember. I was like, oh, where did I get? Yes. Oh, maybe I should turn that over to you because this is your point. Sorry, I totally forgot.
No, you pretty much got it.
Well, yeah, exactly. With Vertov being like, well, I like the fact that you just ripped this off from me, and Eisenstein being like, no, I only did that because that's the way it works in the film, to have the factory shutting down. Wasn't my intent to do, a man with the film camera. That's just, you just kind of have to show a factory. I don't know what to tell you.
I just think it's funny that it's been so long since I've written my master's thesis and given it to you to read that at some point you must have internalized part of it as you wrote, which is an accomplishment, really.
Well, it's an important stage of us becoming one person as slowly I start to make more and more of your points as my own.
Yeah. Yeah, soon we'll just need one of us.
soon there will just be one of us.
There will just be one of us. You want to know something else that's crazy about Eisenstein?
Tell me.
This is kind of unrelated, but I just wanted to bring it up again because I think it's kind of cool. He's got this other essay where he's talking about haiku, and I think he's talking about Japanese or Chinese, and I don't really know like what his level of understanding of the languages were, so I don't really know. I had a student give me a wavering thumbs up on his explanation, so I consider it all right. So the reason that he thinks that film is patterned like dialectically and montage works dialectically through that collision is because this is kind of like the basis of all of the Soviet understanding of the world. And this is where the Soviets kind of start to get into trouble, I think, which is that basically like the explanation of everything has to be dialectics, and the explanation of everything kind of has to break down into this. And this becomes an issue later in like Soviet science and whatnot. But for the time being, what's interesting is to look at how Eisenstein tries to find examples of kind of things appearing dialectically almost like in nature. And so this is why he goes to poetry and to Japanese, or I think actually it's Chinese, and these sort of calls them like montage phrases, which is the combination of two characters that create this sort of, it works the same exact way as montage. It creates a third meaning that's actually not in either of the two characters, but because they're both there, that this sort of the visual collision of them creates this third. And so he almost uses this as a linguistic proof of his view of montage. That's nuts. That's nuts. My students are like leaving the classroom at this point. Like, you want to hear another thing?
Do you want to know what else is actually montage?
Yeah, they don't. But I tell them it's going to be on the midterm. So,
well, they'll stick around for that part at least.
Yeah, they do.
And the question is just, what is montage? And the answer is everything all the way down.
Montage.
What is Twin Peaks but a montage of errors and pies?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's a little bit difficult because it sort of feels like you're going through the film and just like listing different things that are montage or like listing the different techniques. But that to me is something I find interesting about Eisenstein, is just paying attention to technique, because he really is one of the people that's really, really thinking about his own technique. It's not like he's stumbling upon most of these things accidentally, but he is colliding, let's say. We shall say it's as if he's colliding with them.
One could very well say that. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, it's a great film. It moves very quickly. I think this is anything I no longer remember where I got it from. I'm just going to immediately assume that it's from your thesis.
Oh, perfect.
Was it? It's a fairly like a speedy film. I think the average shot is about 2.5 seconds. Does this sound familiar to you? Is this your writing?
Yeah, I think I know what book you pulled it from.
Okay,
so, yeah.
There we go. Yeah. So it moves along at an interesting pace, and has, for a story about a strike, just a solid story of the organizers being caught and turned, and them being brought in and beaten, and then said, "Hey, you could do 3 years of hard labor, or you could tell us a little bit more about who else is running this whole thing." So a surprising amount of drama and theatrics in there, which is gonna as I turn to his later films gets turned up to 11 in the best way possible. I love Ivan Grozny with all of my heart now.
Yeah.
Going wide.
Kind of a king, really.
kind of a king. Every time I saw a Big Shadow,
actually, literally a king.
Literally the king of the hobos. He didn't have to do that character, but he did. He's dressing up. He gets in the Caesar's police get in his car. He spits water at his helper.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great, surprising amount of comedy in a film about murdering strikers.
Yeah. It really is. But now I think the point on the shot length is kind of interesting too. Just that, going back to the idea of mathematically calculating pressure. It's not meditative cinema, right? It's not Tarkovsky. You, as the viewer, are not meant to think too hard on it, let's say. You're sort of meant to just be led.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
And so I think this is why, to me, this film is just an excellent representation of early Eisenstein, and wonderful if you are a professor that needs to design an exercise where you're, tracing theory and practice pretty clearly. It's easy to do.
Yeah.
There's obviously more nuance to it, and it continues to get more and more complicated, problematized, if I may.
You may. I'll allow it.
I may. Yeah. As the, as time progresses, and as you already alluded to, when sound gets added, how does that work? Why are so many directors against adding sound to films? It's, hilariously funny.
Right.
The amount of debate over sound. They say, well, okay, no, the purpose of film, the essence of it is montage, so we don't need sound. And then they quickly resolve it by saying, you know what? Sound can be part of montage. Okay, we can have sound now. Real easy.
Just integrate it right in there.
Yeah, and then, in my opinion, sort of everything starts to become montage, and it starts to get a little, leaky in terms of definitions.
Well, that's one of the great things about reading Eisenstein's work is that he's a theoretician, but not really truly a philosopher concerned with having a consistent worldview. It's just what am I thinking today?
Nick, I think it all kind of is. It's all cohesive. I think it makes sense if you kind of think about it like your Eisenstein. Right. That's how I have to remind myself. It's not going to make the most sense, but it'll make some sense.
You see it. You see it in context. Right. When I glibly say, what am I thinking today? It's evolving thoughts, right? And he's not too concerned with making it all square because his thoughts are evolving. We don't square our own thoughts. So this is the same way we all approach these.
I don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we certainly don't.
Never have.
Tried. Didn't end well.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything else you wanted to cover? I feel like that. That was a great lecture. Thank you.
I have 17 more essays I should talk about.
Well, I hope you're ready for the next 2 hours of this podcast. You're finally getting what you asked for, the 7-hour podcast.
Someone did ask for that.
Someone did, yeah. One day you'll be cursed for asking that by getting exactly what you asked for.
Yep. Be careful what you wish for.
All right. Maybe this is a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah. I think that seems about as good a spot as any.
In that case, I got to ask, what are we covering in our next episode?
Next episode, we're back in the office, baby. It's time for office hours, and I'm digging deep into big questions like, why don't men read novels? We found a terribly clickbaity article on this subject, and we're going to blow it into an hour.
And well, maybe we even cover the elite college students who can't read books. I'm sure if you've been online, you've heard of that.
Oh yeah, that's actually not clickbait. That's sadly true.
That one's true. It is. We've got some thoughts. I'm happy to share some thoughts from our people in our Discord. And also, I do have to say, you saying that to me broke my own self-imposed ban on reading The Atlantic. So,
yeah,
really making me.
It's never a great day when you got to read The Atlantic, but.
It's my greatest shame of being a freshman in college was reading every issue of The Atlantic when it came out.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a bad time in my life. Imagine
that is rough.
meeting a 19-year-old who reads The Atlantic and foreign policy for fun. It's a dark time.
I could because I went to school in D.C. and that was all of us.
You're not unique. You're not special. That's everyone who goes into government service.
No, yeah, you are just someone who probably should have been born on the East Coast.
A man at a time, man at a place.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, to help keep our show independent and for exclusive access to the harebrained scheme that constitutes notes for this episode, head on over to our website, slaviclitpod.com. Before we let you go, we want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our current supporters.
Yes, and that is Alice, Dearball, Cynthia, Seamus, Camille, Emma, Lauren, Erica, Michelle, Juliana, Diane, Oleg, John, Timex, Melissa, Baron, Aldo, Ben, Gabe, George, Claire, Amy, Allie, Soraya, Jackson, Molly, Emma, Mike, Marianne, Mickey, Eric, Reagan, Mike, Peter, Eric, Ben, Claire, Jeff, Inez, Mai, Robert, Joseph, Daniel, Lou, Nina, Gary, Janice, Mary, Anne, Isaac, Emily, Amanda, Caitlin, Yitza, Irene, and Pack Rob. The music used in this episode was Staroye Kino by Peremotka. You can find more of their stuff on Bandcamp or Spotify. The links and spelling are in the show notes.
You'll hear from us again soon.
Hey, 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 hey.